there's a section in my book on romantic idealism called What Men Need Women For. And some of those are men have no beauty, motivation, connection, or peace without women, where I kind of show what a purely masculine experience of reality is like, and it's spoiler, not very pleasant. It's pretty
Kind of dull,
gray
yeah.
and dull, and you don't really have a reason to care about anything. It's like air, like you're just completely disconnected from everything. It's peaceful in its own way, surely. Don't get me wrong.
Like Heaven Sent.
By the Doctor Who episode. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, but that's more about grief in particular. That's definitely disconnection in a very masculine, prolonged state of being, but with a focus on grief. The masculine experience doesn't necessarily have to be grief. He just happened to have something to feel grief about during that episode. But yeah, that disconnect and aimlessness is very, very masculine.
Lacking the
Certainly.
feminine, and so hence spending 4 billion
Yes.
years chasing it.
Yes. Because his female companion died, and that's why his life suddenly lacked beauty and connection, and the only solution was to punch his way through a diamond wall to regain that feminine connection and beauty. That's a male life summed up, isn't it?
Although it's really overblown though, because he did not experience 4 billion years. He got a
Right.
cheat.
Sure, but even if it was just weeks or months, that's still pretty impressive.
Eh,
Um, right. Next is men can't live like men in quotes without women. So I'm using the word men in two different ways there. Men being the gender, males, and men being like humanity. Men cannot experience humanity.
if
Um,
that's the section title, might not be great because people won't be on your wavelength and go, "Oh, he's using it in two different ways."
well, one of them is in quotes, and it's just a subheading where I immediately explain what I mean.
Oh, okay.
And in this one, I use several examples from movies, including
So
Doctor
what you
Who.
say that the second one is man? What was it? As in human?
Yeah, yeah, you can't live like a normal man, which is kind of continuing on the theme that men are naturally disconnected from the world. And a common poetic interpretation is the difference between spirit and flesh, which is mentioned in the book slash movie The Last Temptation of Christ, which is all about Jesus's humanized struggle between the spirit and the flesh. Should I live like a man or should I be the Messiah, the Son of God? Which one can I be both? Can I be neither? Can I stick to one? So I mentioned that, and I also generalized that concept for
Doesn't he need to master all four elements first?
that's the Avatar you're thinking of, not the Messiah. Good, good guess though.
Same thing. Same thing.
Yeah, I get my religions mixed up too sometimes. Uh,
And then he uses the force.
I should mention Avatar somewhere in here. Something about the separation of the four elements would definitely be appropriate in this book. So I'll have to think of where that would be best to fit in. Um, because the way I see it, actually, if you think about it,
Women are like water.
I would say women are both water and fire, and men are both earth and air.
Oh, just shitting on me, okay.
Because women being feminine doesn't necessarily mean like soft and loving and adaptable and flowing, right? It can mean that. It can also be fiery and intense and chaotic and blowing up in your face, though. That's also a very feminine way to act. And men can be very aloof and detached and spiritual, for lack of a better term, but they can also be very grounded and sunk into the earth and building shit with their hands and in their body in that sort of way. I'd have to work out the details a bit more, but that's kind of how I've been thinking about it. So there could be a place to bring up the avatar mapping schematics of the elements and what they equate to in personality traits. Where was I? I mentioned Doctor Who in this section where I mentioned, yeah, for instance, that the Doctor almost always has a female companion with him because it humanizes him, because his natural state is to be alienated. He's a literal alien, which, floating above humanity and still trying to care about them. I use a quote from Donna
The
Noble
Time
here.
Lord and the Time Lord and the Mayflies.
Yeah, basically. I use a Donna Noble quote where she says in her first episode as she's leaving him, she says, "Just promise me one thing. Find someone." And this Doctor Number 10, David Tennant, says, "I don't need anyone." And she says, "Yeah, you do, because sometimes I think you just need someone to stop you." And that's very indicative of like the role the right woman plays in a man's life, like helping him know when it's appropriate to act and when
Stopping
not
him, got
to.
it.
Yeah, or enabling him, like motivating him too. That's like the inverted verb of motivation is knowing when to stop too, in addition to when to act. Um, yeah, we got Jesus in there. My principal anguish, the source of all my joys and sorrows from my youth onward, has been the incessant, merciless battle between the spirit and the flesh. I have fought to reconcile these two primordial forces, which are so contrary to one another, to make them realize they are not enemies, but rather fellow workers, so that they might rejoice in their harmony. That's the author of The Last Temptation of Christ. Then I have
Oh, I
many.
thought that was you for a second.
No, I don't quite write that flowery, but um,
I thought you would. I thought you were.
that is
Yeah.
Nikos Kazantzakis. Then I have men can't become who they are supposed to be without women, although this might turn into men can't fulfill their potential without women. And here I
That
mention,
is shorter and seems to mean basically the same thing.
yes, I mentioned both Superman and Neo from the Matrix, because in both in the recent Zack Snyder Superman movies, Man of Steel and Batman v Superman and Justice League, a critical part of the plot is the role Lois Lane plays in his life in helping him become Superman instead of just a guy with superpowers. And then
Lois,
is that a Family
Peter
Guy?
Griffin.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Um, and then frequently overlooked in the Matrix, the first Matrix movie, is that Neo does not become the one until Trinity falls in love with him. It's a major plot point. It's explicitly pointed out by the Oracle, where she
I
says,
haven't watched it in ages.
"Yeah, in fact, I was
Like,
surprised
what
I
is
almost
that a
overlooked it."
requirement of him becoming the one?
When
If
he
so, that's
first
kind of
goes to
dumb.
the Oracle, because Morpheus thinks he might be the one, and the Oracle's supposed to answer that question for him, she says,
Don't mind about the vase.
yeah, after
What
that,
vase? Smash.
yes. She says, "You already know what I'm going to tell you. You're not the one. It feels like you're waiting for something, your next life, maybe. Who knows? But you've got potential. So, hey, kid, do some good, right?" And he kind of just accepts, "Okay, I'm not the one. I'm just a guy. That's fine. And it isn't until he is ready to die trying to fight Agent Smith. He first is killed by Agent Smith because he hasn't fully embraced all his one powers. And then
When's that?
at the end of the movie, Agent Smith kills him. And
First
then,
movie.
yeah, and then Trinity resurrects
Okay.
him
Wow, really
by
need to
by
rewatch it then.
admitting her love for him, saying, "You can't be dead because the Oracle told me that the man I loved would be the one, and I'm in love with you." And then he comes
Oh,
back to
okay.
life because he wasn't the one yet until she acknowledged her love for him, which like strengthened him, and he became the Superman, the one, because of her love for him. Right? So I say things like that a man becomes the version he sees of himself reflected in a woman's eyes, the woman he loves eyes. Well, The Matrix is interesting because it seems like almost everyone who's seen The Matrix has their own interpretation that they're sure is the right one about The Matrix, like, being red pilled, or this is the world of illusion they tried to warn you about in The Matrix, the government conspiracies, or such and such other thing. And they're all missing the obvious point that it's just a really good metaphor for any kind of mass delusion or false belief. It works for whatever you want it to
Yeah.
work for, right? And I have recently read the book Simulacra and Simulation by Baudrillard, which I believe was the primary
Who dat?
influence. He's a French philosopher. I haven't read any of his other work, but I believe it was the primary influence on the Wachowskis, and that they even made all the cast members of The Matrix read it. It's not a great book. I find it way too dense and difficult to read, but it brings up some very interesting points
Cool.
about,
Thanks for that anti-recommendation.
yeah, like, I mean, I'm not I don't regret reading it, but it could have been stated much better, I think, which is true of a lot of philosophy, to be honest. Um, but it gives some interesting examples about how we simulate reality so automatically without even realizing it because we've just accepted it as normal. Like one prominent example he gives in the beginning is that uh, Disneyland feels like a fake world. When we go to Disneyland, we accept it as this constructed, simulated world, right? Where everything has its own rules and its own narrative and its own feelings and values that, and we consider that artificial. But we know it's artificial and we willfully indulge in it. Same thing when we're watching a movie or something, the willing suspension of disbelief. Okay, for the next 2 hours, I'm in the world of Superman or whatever, right? Um,
But
but then he's
in movies, isn't the point that you get so absorbed in it that it doesn't feel like it's a construction, artificial. It feels like this
Well,
is the real
yeah, sure. You're still responding to
thing.
it emotionally as though it's real, but consciously you know that it's not. And it's the same thing when you go to a theme park like Disneyland. You know
Maybe
that
you
it's,
do.
yeah, I do. I'm pretty smart, so I figured it out. Um, I'm the only one.
I'm the guy who holds his breath when characters go underwater.
Right. That's a movie's job. If it's done its job well, you should be engaged in what's happening, almost as though it's real. Right. But you still consciously know that it's just a movie. The same thing when you go to Disneyland, you know that it's just Disneyland, that it's been designed to create these kind of feelings in you.
If you're that drawn in, isn't it subconscious at that point?
No, because
Because your
you
conscious
still
attention
know.
is focused on the content and
No, like a child probably might be fooled into believing it's real, but an adult would know this is a
yeah, I'm
simulated
not
world.
saying they believe, I mean subconsciously, as in your conscious mind, there's no longer the element of it not being real. You're just focused on it. You could call it to mind if you paused for a second and you're like, oh yeah, this isn't real.
Um, in a movie or in Disneyland?
Movie. I
Uh,
haven't been to
I
Disneyland.
don't remember ever being that completely engrossed in a movie, maybe except as a child, where I literally just started to accept it as reality instead of something happening on the screen in front of me. Although I
Not
can,
really, not exactly what I mean. Like, I'm not saying you, like, I'm saying it's subconscious instead of conscious because your conscious mind is absorbed with it, you're focused on it. So it's not in your conscious mind that this isn't real. It would have to be brought to your conscious mind by just like taking your attention off the movie for a second and going, oh yeah,
I don't know. Maybe I just have a particularly active conscious mind. I've done a lot of psychedelic drugs, and with the exception of Salvia divinorum, which is a story that would take a long time to get into, I never once didn't know I was on a drug. Like I never like started freaking out, whoa, what's happening? The walls are melting or whatever. I always had the presence of mind, even on very heavy doses, to know, oh, that's an interesting thing the drug is doing to my mind. Huh, like I was always completely conscious of that. And that most people I think can't necessarily do that. So maybe like that's just something my mind does. I remain particularly conscious of the state I'm in. I don't know. Anyway, the point that Baudrillard was making was that yeah, when you go to Disneyland, you know that it's a simulated world. But what you forget is that so is the parking lot outside of Disneyland. That's just as simulated as Disneyland itself. Think about
what does
it.
that mean?
What's a
How
parking
is that
lot?
simulated?
What is a parking lot? Tell me.
It's a space where cars can be parked with lines to
Yeah, so that's
separate.
that's what you think it is when you enter a parking lot, right? That's the automatic simulation that pops up in your head telling you what you're looking at, right? It evokes certain emotions, certain images, certain ideas of what you can or should or shouldn't or can't do with it, right? And that's exactly the same thing as when you walk into Disneyland itself and suddenly you say, "Oh, I'm in Disneyland. This is how Disneyland works. This is the simulation constructed for me." The only difference is that with
Why is it
Disneyland,
a
you know that it's a
simulation
simulation. In a parking
parking
lot,
lot? What do you mean by simulation
it's
then?
meaning that your mind is adding as an overlay to the experience of the parking lot. If no one had ever told you what a parking lot was, you'd have a very different experience of it, right?
I don't agree with that use of simulation because simulation as a word doesn't like it brings with it more baggage than that, like
He defined, I don't have the book in
fakery.
front of me, but he defines the way he uses words in a particular way that you could look into. Maybe I'll send you links later. But the point is that it's very, with things that are very familiar to us, that we've accepted as normal, it's very easy for us to forget that the meaning is also constructed in exactly the same way as things that we know where the meaning is constructed, such as movies and theme parks. And that's the matrix, as far as I can tell. The fact we are constantly recreating matrices within matrices. And in fact,
Way
I,
you know
I
the correct plural of
yes,
matrix.
I believe I read somewhere that Baudrillard saw the Matrix and he actually criticized it because he said they made the difference between the fake world and the real world too obvious. Like you're
I
either
thought this
asleep in
was
the
like
Matrix or you're awake
some
in the real world.
philosopher from like, I don't know, over 100 years ago or
No,
something.
no, his book was written in the 90s, I believe, or 80s.
Oh, blimey.
Um, and so if you read what he's saying that the matrix is everywhere and it's matrices within matrices. You can never be completely sure that you're actually seeing things without some kind of simulation influencing the way you perceive it. And he uses even the phrase the desert of the real, which they use in the Matrix too.
The desert of the real.
Yeah, like pure experience of reality without any kind of simulation or meaning added onto it. Anyway, what were we talking about? Neo, the
Yeah.
Matrix. Neo becomes the one because of Trinity's love for him, right? Nobody even talks about that. It doesn't seem like a major part of the movie, but it's actually explicitly commented on in the movie. So I talk about
Yeah, I must have
him.
missed that, but then I probably watched it like when I was a kid. So I wouldn't necessarily got that.
It's worth watching again. Check it out. And then I'm putting all this importance on why a man needs to bond with a woman. Um, but then that opens up concerns of codependence. So I followed up with a section saying, shouldn't a man just learn to be content with himself? Like why be so dependent on being in a relationship and being with a partner and being in love, which is the typical defense normies will give, right? And I say, well, yeah, codependence is a thing and it is unhealthy, and that's not what I'm advocating at all here. I'm saying a man has to embody himself fully and then evolve to the next step of pair bonding with the right woman. Codependence would be when you don't fully evolve yourself and establish yourself as the person you are first, and
And
you're
require the relationship to make up for your um failings as a human being, the ways in which you're not fully developed.
not fully yourself. Yeah. And I even use a distinction between self-satisfaction and self-fulfillment. Self-satisfaction is being satisfied with the person you are, which is what you have to establish first. If you don't have that, then you're a victim, basically. And self-fulfillment is your external actions, the things you accomplish in the world. And if you're a romantically oriented man, that includes building the most fulfilling relationship of your life with the right woman. You will not be fulfilled until you do that if you're this kind of person. And I'm not at all saying all men have to do this. This is specifically about romantically oriented men. That's the whole point of the book. There's some people who just don't put that much importance into these things. That's okay. They don't have to.
Although if they don't put enough on it to at least attempt to find it, then there might be something wrong with them.
Well, some people aren't very romantically or sexually oriented at all. Some people are, but it's not like the driving force of their life. It's just like, hey, a thing we do because it's convenient and it feels good. So, hey, why not? And for some people, it really is one of the driving forces of their lives. I'm one of those people, hence why I'm writing this book. And then in the end, men who grow bitter for their inability to act on romantic interest. I might have to word that more strongly, like maybe men who self-destruct as a result of their inability. Yeah, I think that's a stronger wording. Men who
Is this a section
self-destruct.
title?
A subheading within the chapter, yeah, that comes after everything I just said. Men who self-destruct as a result of their inability to act on romantic interest. And that's where
As
we
a
talk
result
about
of seems wordy for a subheading.
for their inability, because of their inability,
Maybe due to?
due to, yeah, that works better.
Due to. Due
Yeah,
to.
thank you. line editor. And here's,
Lediter, yeah.
yes, I mention incels, the common internet terminology for an involuntary celibate, but of course, this is not a new concept. There probably have always been men at the bottom of every society's sexual hierarchy who could not get laid or married or procreate and lived horribly unfulfilling lives because of it,
And
right?
now the term's taken to like be wrapped up with the ideological stuff, um, like the I have a sneeze. Like the entitlement mentality sort of thing, all that, like it's no longer used to just mean literally what it
Yeah.
is.
Yes. So I do mention men who feel entitled to romantic interest from women, some of which I can sympathize with. I mentioned that when women intentionally try to garner romantic interest from the way they look or act, then I can understand why a man might be confused when a woman does not act on the kind of interest she so clearly seems to be trying to cultivate. Like if a woman dresses
Okay,
and
incel.
acts a certain way. Yeah, thank you. And not at all like victim blaming, like people who get raped or anything, by the way. I know that's how this might sound out of context. But if a woman clearly is acting and dressing in a certain way designed to gather sexual interest from men, it's it's very reasonable to interpret that as, oh, she wants my sexual attention. Otherwise, why would she be acting this way, right? And so, okay, I'm
But
gonna
it's
go give her my
concrete
sexual
versus
attention.
abstract. It's abstractly she does, but not necessarily from
Right.
you
Of course,
specifically.
it's highly manipulative behavior from the women who act this way. It gives them social power. So I can at least understand though why men would be frustrated in certain kinds of
I didn't
situations.
mean that. I meant like if you're trying to find a man, you try to look nice. That doesn't mean that every man who comes up to you you want to be with.
Right. But if you're if you're acting in a way designed to generate mass romantic or sexual interest, means you're expecting lots of men to give you romantic interest. And if you are highly selective in who you respond to, it means that the majority of the men who give you that sexual interest that you are looking for are going to be disappointed with the encounter. And you should know that going into it. That shouldn't be a surprise to you if you're one of these women.
Maybe the problem is with the men being disappointed at least to any significant extent rather than expecting that um most of the time they're not going to get anything out of it because that's just how the men and women roles are. Women are the selectors predominantly.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean you have to like highly exaggerate and overemphasize this whole process and make it more chaotic and disappointing to the men. Like, yes, men will always pursue women more than women pursue men. That's a fact of nature, right? But the type of women I'm talking about are the ones who take it to the furthest possible extreme, trying to get as much sexual interest as possible from 99% of men who will be disappointed with their attempts and having no sympathy for these
Yeah,
men.
maybe if you take it to that extent,
Yeah.
especially if it's like introducing more artifice rather than trying to find the man who wants to marry you as you look.
Anyway, obviously women are entitled to dress and act however they want, right? I'm just saying you can't
Women are
really be
entitled. That's what you just said.
women, freedom of expression. But I'm just saying you shouldn't be surprised when your freedom of expression results in very obviously predictable negative outcomes, right? Um, and I also turn it around on men who basically feel like if they follow the rules of their dating culture, they're entitled to a wife, right? From modern societies or very primitive ones, like where I live in Armenia, there's a lot of very primitive dating and marriage culture where basically Armenian men feel like they're entitled to a proper, good Armenian woman who acts a certain way and has never known the touch of a man before. And so when they see people like me, like preaching the opposite, saying, "Hey, Armenian women, do whatever the fuck you
They
want."
send you death threats.
Yes, they interpret it as though I am stealing their women from them, the women they are entitled to, like they have earned a good, proper Armenian wife because they followed the rules of their culture, and now here I'm saying, hey, women, you don't have to follow the same rules. You can do
Follow
whatever
the
you
rules of
want.
their culture, meaning they haven't developed as individuals.
Yeah, they don't think for themselves, of course.
Weak.
Yes, they essentially don't
Their
exist
bloodlines
as
deserve to
individuals.
fail unless
Yes,
they step up.
yes,
Your bloodline ends here unless you think.
yes. So, um, and that's one reason why sexual and romantic liberation is so important, which doesn't mean necessarily non-discrimination, like have sex with or date anyone and everyone, but to learn what your own discrimination is, what your own preferences are, and then embody those.
Uh,
That's what the book is about. That's just one chapter of the book, but I'm framing it as the masculine experience of romantic idealism. I think that pretty clearly communicates what I'm trying to get across.
are you trying to find someone to write the pair book, the exact same but flipping so the
From the
feminine
feminine perspective,
experience?
I
Yeah.
may have already found the person who's going to write that book, believe it or not. I don't think I can share too much yet because nothing's confirmed, but it's quite likely I have actually already found the woman best suited to write the feminine equivalent of. So I actually say in the introduction of the book, obviously I'm writing this from a very biased masculine perspective, right? I write about women, but I cannot write directly from the feminine experience because it's not my experience, right? I can only apply conjecture and educated guesses because I've known a lot of women quite intimately, and I've
And
talked to them about these kinds of
whatever you can
things.
get from explicit interviews, so then
Yeah,
it's
sure.
from the mouth of woman.
Yes, a lot of things I have explicitly asked women, others are just kind of things I pieced together by observing women in various conditions and states of undress. And but I say, very
In
clearly,
states of duress, yeah.
this, so this book is primarily going to be about and for men and the masculine experience, but also I'd love it if women read this book so that they can learn about men, and a lot of women who have seen parts of the book have been surprised by the things they've learned about what the masculine experience of life can be like sometimes. Like one said to me recently, uh, I never imagined it would be so hard to experience beauty or joy in life because it's just so natural and easy to her, right? But I go on to say, I would love it if some qualified woman wrote the feminine equivalent of this book. I would be the first to read it because as much as I have learned about women, I probably know more about women than 99% of men, which isn't
So you're
saying very
gonna say
much.
99% of women for a second
No,
then.
no, than men, but
I know
that's
more
but
about
that's
you than
not
you.
saying much because most men are idiots who are completely oblivious to women. Um, But I imagine how much I would learn hearing it directly from a woman who was qualified to articulate this kind of stuff and explain it as thoroughly as I explain the masculine experience, right? God, what an amazing revelatory book that would be. So hopefully the woman I think might be able to write that book, or some other woman who feels up to the challenge writes it. And I even say it in the introduction,
Well,
write to me,
that
I'll help you
woman.
produce the book.
So far, do you think you basically have the whole like outline of the book, like each kind of chapter, or at least like section?
It's very close. I'm sure I'll continue to make adjustments, but yeah, the basic structure of the book is there.
Okay, can you run through that so I know what to ask questions about? Like, I'm assuming you can do that in less than like a minute or two,
Yeah,
kind of run
I'll
through
read
the
you
basic.
the chapter titles I have. Um,
Are they clear?
yeah, I'm a pretty clear guy.
Cool.
The romantic burden at its core, basically defining what it means to be a romantic, hopeless or otherwise, a romantically oriented person, the experience of being inclined toward romanticism. This one is currently titled, Hey, Men and Women Are Different. I might change that because it sounds too informal. Hey, men
But
and
I
women are
mean,
different.
you don't have to do like other author things like, oh, all other authors do it this way, and Like, if you want to write with your voice, then, maybe just you do you.
Yeah, well, I should be fairly consistent throughout the book. If every other chapter title's like this big, pompous, important, stylish thing, then it might be weird, a little out of place that one is just like, hey, just so you know, by the way,
Yeah, but I mean, don't you have a section? What was that song? Shania Twain, that one.
yes, but that's not a chapter title. That's just a quick little subsection
Yeah.
within a chapter that can quickly be
Oh,
skimmed
that's the
over.
word, subsection.
Yeah, that's where I say, okay, so you're an Instagram model. That don't impress
That don't
me
impress me
much.
much.
Yes. And that's where I mention my old high school buddy, not really
Oh,
buddy, but someone I knew in high school who named Emily
yeah, I forgot a
Ratajkowski.
name. That's it.
Yeah, I mention not just for the purpose of name dropping, although that's fun to
Wait,
do
wasn't there
too.
a J in her last name?
It's spelled Ratajkowski, I believe. It's like Polish or something. Owski is a very Polish sounding last name. I don't know. Um, there is a purpose to it. I'm not just saying, hey, by the way, I went to high school with a supermodel, you know? I'm saying, isn't it interesting the social role this woman played while I was in high school with her, and now the social role she's playing on a much grander scale for the entire world? And I even have a quote from her because she wrote a book called My Body, where she talks about her perception and the
Fucking hell.
world's perception of her body. Let me find it. So I even quote her, to get.
Oh, lordy.
Um, she says, I post Instagram photos that I think of as testaments to my beauty, and then obsessively check the likes to see if the internet agrees. I collect this data more than I want to admit, trying to measure my allure as objectively and brutally as possible. I want to calculate my beauty to protect myself, to understand exactly how much power and lovability I have. Emily Ratajkowski, My Body.
She sounds weak, like she's very dependent on the opinions of others for her view of herself.
Um, I'm saying this is one of the most sexually desired women in the world. In terms of the sexual social hierarchy, she is near the very top, right?
Really,
And
I've seen her. I'm like,
well, I mean, regardless of what you think of her, first of all, she does have very nice breasts. Like that's okay to admit that. There's nothing wrong with
think
having
you
nice
said that
breasts.
before.
Yeah, no, I don't think she's one of the most attractive women in the world. She wouldn't be like my choice, but yeah, she looks good naked. Okay. Congrats. You know?
Oh, what have you seen pictures of her naked?
There are naked pictures of her everywhere. I've seen her naked without trying to see her naked. She's naked
Oh,
in the
right.
movie with Ben Affleck. Gone Girl. She takes off her shirt in that movie, I believe. So women, normal women, like regular women, like who just try to appear sexy and attractive, who feel insecure about their looks because they don't get enough attention, um, for them to hear that one of the most sexually desired women in the world, and then therefore by corollary, one of the most powerful women in the world, because sexual interest is power, still feels inadequate, still feels like she
Insecure.
needs to prove that she is desirable with every Instagram photo she uploads. Which is,
Cringe.
first of all, shockingly self-aware that she could like acknowledge that and write that down and still continue to post semi-nude selfies or whatever she posts on Instagram. I don't know. I don't even follow this one. But my point is like, if you know this, if you know it's a shallow pursuit, why do you keep doing it? Just because it makes you rich and famous? Like, is there character and substance to you or not? That's what I'm trying to figure out. She seems fairly
Yeah,
intelligent.
she may not be much of an introspector and able to change the course of
Well,
her
if she was introspective enough
life.
to acknowledge that and write it down, that's got to mean something. So what comes after that realization?
Uh, what she's doing, continuing because she doesn't have the balls
I don't
to
know. I mean, I
figure out
if
how
I
to
could make millions of
change it.
dollars by taking off my shirt and taking a few photos, I'd probably do it, right? So can I really judge her for that, right? Anyway, yes, that don't impress
I would
me
if I
much.
thought there was a meaningful purpose to it, like if it showed um like, I don't know, the human body at its peak, which certainly isn't mine, and I'm sure
No,
not yours,
you're
but
not the apex of masculinity.
I'm not an Adonis, no,
Okay,
not physically. But yeah, like otherwise, I think it might just be an issue of integrity. Like, there's no way within your integrity to do that and try and command that much power from your body unless it's demonstrating this is how great a human body can be, sort of thing.
I guess like Da Vinci with his
Six
drawings
arms.
of the Vitruvian Man, or Michelangelo's statue of David, or these artworks that were meant to like glorify the human form. I don't know.
Yeah, if I could be made into an artwork that glorifies the human form, and it genuinely does, and I'd be paid a handsome sum for it, then I'd probably go for that. But if it's some falsehood, which it probably would be, some illusion of greatness, and it would still make me a ton of money, then I'd probably have to not do it.
Okay, well that's an interesting philosophical trail to go down. But the point of that part of the book is mostly for men to cause them to question, hey, does it really matter that you find a woman physically attractive? Guys, does it really matter? Because for the immature, undeveloped man, that seems to be the dominant romantic drive, if not the sole exclusive one. Just, oh shit, that woman's hot. I gotta go get her number, see if I can get her to sleep with me, or just talk to me because she looks good.
I
And
see it as kind of, if you don't or can't see a woman as physically attractive, and like you can actually develop physical attraction over time towards someone anyway, but if you can't, then there's no like there's no possible relationship with them. Like, say you've known a woman a while and got to appreciate how she looks, and it's like you're just still not um physically attracted to her, then there's no like
yeah, I do
worthwhile
mention that too, that
relationship there.
the romantic
Where,
bond requires physical attraction, physical chemistry, and
yeah,
compatibility. Definitely. It's just that that can't be the only or even the main
yeah,
drive.
that's what I mean. Like,
It's
to
it's
me,
just
that's
one
what it is.
qualifier.
It's
Yes.
like it's a filter. If it's
Yeah.
not there and doesn't develop over time, you
Yeah.
then things
Then
can't
there's not
proceed.
romantic
If it
compatibility.
is,
Sure. There could
then
be other
maybe
kinds of
things
compatibility.
can, but
Yeah.
there are plenty of other filters and things that, like, yeah, if a woman doesn't live up to, then attraction shouldn't be sufficient, regardless of the level of attractiveness.
Right. But the problem is that because visual appeal, physical beauty is so much easier to communicate and recognize than all other types of compatibility and appeal, it's very easy for a man in particular to become preoccupied with visual physical appeal, right? Because like you could have an amazing psychological chemistry with someone, but you're not going to figure that out right away. Whereas you can look across a room and see, fuck, that woman looks good. I'd love to see her naked. I'd love to have sex with her because look, she looks good. Right? That's a very easy conclusion to make. And again, there's nothing wrong with that in and of itself. Just finding a woman attractive and even sleeping with a woman you purely just find physically attractive just for the physical experience of sleeping with a very attractive body. I've done that plenty of times. It's not the most rewarding experience in the world. It's not what I seek from my sex life now, but there's nothing wrong with it.
And
I'm
of
glad I
course,
had those
we
experiences.
disagree on the validity of a man
Yeah.
doing that.
So you would never devalue yourself just to have sex with a woman because she looks good. Okay. Um, it's like doing a drug, basically. And you know how much I've learned from
Women are like
drugs.
drugs. Ooh,
No,
you could work that in
yeah.
somehow. Women are
Women
like
are like
drugs.
drugs. Women are like drugs. Love is a drug. Love is like oxygen. Love is all you need. Love lifts us up where we belong.
Is that are those lyrics?
Yeah, it's from Moulin Rouge where he's paraphrasing a bunch
Uh,
of love songs.
Voulez-vous coucher avec moi
Not
ce
that one.
soir?
Yeah. Um,
isn't the love chemical oxytocin? That's got the oxy's got to mean there's like oxygen in it, right? You were just mentioning oxygen. It might have been in your lyrics.
Love is like oxygen is from Electric Light Orchestra.
Yeah.
Love is like oxygen. Too much will get you high. Not enough and you're gonna die. Love gets you high. Something like that. Right. So, a lot of this book is just a warning for men, like about
Mm.
traps like obsession with physical beauty that you can fall into.
What other traps are there?
There are a lot of
Something to do with narcissism?
toxic, manipulative women
Both,
definitely get a large
yeah, both narcissistic women and the man falling prey to narcissism.
yes. So that section of the book, so far, I've had several women read parts of this book, right? Some who agreed with every
Oh,
word I
oh,
said.
oh.
Hmm? Hmm?
Have you got anything about um I'm not sure how to make it fully relevant what I'm thinking, but like being a good person as a man, like the experience of being a good person and how it differs from that of a woman because they're not the exact same thing.
I don't think I have anything phrased in those particular terms.
Like I know you got a whole book about heroism and
Uh-huh.
that's more a male
Yeah, that's definitely told
masculine
from the
thing, but
masculine perspective too, because
maybe
masculinity,
there's some overlap.
certainly, as I roughly define masculinity and femininity in this book, is that masculinity is more concerned with conception and femininity is more concerned with experience. And so things like purpose and like big external accomplishments are all about conception, meaning we add to our actions, not the direct experience itself. That's why they're more masculine experiences or concepts, if that made any sense. So that if the answer to your question would be something along those lines, that how men and women experience a sense of, I don't know, virtue or purpose or meaning would probably be different along those lines. That men have to do something they consider purposeful, or a woman has to exist in a certain state.
That might be a kind of exist. What do you mean by exist in a certain state? I don't think a rational woman would see herself as virtuous by just simply existing in a certain state, as opposed
I don't
to
know if she'd use the word
being
virtuous,
virtuous.
but she would probably say she feels most like empowered, most herself, most self-expressed when she is creating a world of beauty and comfort and, you know, pleasantness around her, something like that.
Those are values.
Yeah. But it's like the difference between a noun and a verb. A woman is a noun, a man is a verb. I should put that in the book. That's good. I'll have to elaborate on that.
Hopefully, you don't get death threats for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Women are just there, men do things.
Right. Then none of that is meant to devalue either one. You need both. Every sentence requires both a subject and a predicate. So
And of course, women still need to do things, and men still need to be
be
comfortable in their own existence. Yeah, being
yes, yes, obviously. So a lot
yin
of
and yang sort of thing where
I mentioned
there's
yin and yang a
no
bit.
there's no like
Yeah,
hard
there's
absolute
yin
divide.
in the
There's
yang and yang in the
some
yin. There's
yeah,
chocolate in my
some
peanut butter and peanut
femininity
butter in
with
my chocolate.
like maybe that means to some extent within masculinity there's something of femininity and vice versa. I don't know what
Yes.
sense that
I
makes,
give an
but
example in my own life that I would say the most feminine thing about me is my instinct for nurturing and caretaking helpless life forms like stray cats and children. That's a feminine virtue, one I happen to be very comfortable with and excel with under the right conditions. And of course, there's a masculine, manly, fatherly way to do that, which is all about like teaching and instilling discipline. There's also the feminine way of nurturing and taking care of and supporting, both of which I'm good at. So I would say that's the most feminine trait that I have. But that does not make me a feminine man. Almost everything else about me is very masculine.
And even it in itself is still not fully feminine, like it's um a masculine thing to take responsibility in that way, to take responsibilities onto your shoulders, sort of thing.
Hmm. Yeah, good point.
So there's masculine within the feminine, within the masculine, within the and so on. Maybe it's
It's matrices
little
all the way
dots.
down.
Yeah, maybe it's little dots within the things all the way down.
Yeah. Yes. So I've had many women read parts of this book, some of whom already basically agreed with me, some of whom started off largely disagreeing with me, like even being offended by the idea of like categorizing men and women differently, like saying you can't tell women what they're supposed to be or vice versa. But as they read the book, they largely end up agreeing with the kinds of generalizations I'm making about women's experiences like this, men's experiences like this. Men are assholes for treating women like this, um, and they agree with almost
Women are
everything.
assholes for treating
Yeah,
men like
until
this and this
until
and
we
this and
get
this
to
and this
that
and this and
point
this.
where even though I spend the majority of the book saying things like men are wrong for treating women this way, and I go on and on for pages and pages about that. I'm a self-hating man, right? When I get to the part where I say, but by the way, women can also horribly mistreat men like this by being toxic, manipulative bitches.
Oh, which
That's
do you
when
have more of? I was thinking you
oh,
might have
I'm
more
no,
of
it's
women mistreating men
no,
because your
I would say,
experience.
well, it's the book talks more about men than women because again, I'm speaking from the man's perspective, so I would say it's weighted more talking about the ways that men mistreat women. So, if anything, it's more misandrist than misogynist. But there are parts where I very explicitly say, hey, women can be horrible, horrible creatures when they act this way. And
How
that's
do
when the
you
women lose their shit and say, how dare you? Women are wonderful and amazing and victims of men's patriarchy. We never do anything wrong.
how do you know so much about how men mistreat women then? Because I'm assuming you don't think you've really mistreated women over your life, like
I
other than
have
maybe a
mistreated
mistake
women.
or two.
Sure, not in a long time. When I was a young man,
I
when I
mean,
was a
like
teenager,
other
sure.
than like a few youthful mistakes, but I mean in terms of quantity, how do you get like it sounds
Um,
like you're saying you have a
Travel
lot of
experience
material.
mostly. I've been around
So
the world a few
observing
times.
men and how they treat
Yeah.
women.
Yeah, I mentioned I live in Armenia right now, which I consider a very sexually primitive country in terms of
I'm
their
sorry, that's not
relationship
very
dynamics.
feminist of you. Were mentioned.
Yes, sorry, we mentioned are Womenia, the country I'm currently in. Right. So, but not just here. I've been lots of places, and even in the so-called more developed places like the West, there's still plenty of signs of how women view and stereotype and treat women very unfairly, right? And I really
Did you just
do
say how women
know
stereotype and treat women?
know how men do this to women, right? Um, I often identify even to a further extent than most women do, the women ones who are directly experiencing it. Like I notice it more, I see it, right? And and in a place like Armenia,
Do you
uh,
mean that like they don't see how men are treating them as wrong and you're like, "Oh,
yeah,
this is
but
clearly
like
wrong."
even I pointed out to them more than even they notice it sometimes, right? Because I'm seeing it from the man's perspective. And even as a mature, developed man, I can still see that
Oh,
immature, undeveloped masculine impulse that causes them to act that way. Like I
do you
still
have
get it. It's like
do you
watching a
have
caveman.
ooh, ooh, okay, man. Do you have anything on violence and the inequality? Because men clearly are in a physically dominant position.
Hmm.
Like a man being violent towards his female partner is like something's gone horribly wrong. Whereas say if a woman slaps her male partner, not great, but there's no real physical threat there. There is no threat of completely physically dominating him.
Well, a woman can hurt a man. Even without a weapon, but certainly with a weapon too. Absolutely, a woman can hurt a man. So I would take any type of physical abuse seriously. Obviously, there's more potential if the abuser is physically stronger and larger, as
I
most men
mean, but
are.
like man and woman are concrete specific people. So any typical one, the woman is going to be weaker. So take
Okay, but
some
even
specific.
if she is a physically weaker person, can still fuck up a larger, stronger person. When a woman does that, I would say like an immature woman who lashes out and starts trying to slap her partner or hurt him in any way, most of the time, I don't believe she's seriously trying to injure him. It'd probably be more akin to like a child lashing out and throwing their toy across the room at their parents or something. In that kind of situation, a child thinks their parent is basically invincible and that they can't actually hurt them, so that gives them free rein to just do whatever the fuck they want, right? I would think that's probably the mentality a woman like that would be in. Like, oh, he's a big, strong man. I can do whatever the fuck I want to him, right? Which is very
But
immature and horrible and
I
childish, and
mean,
she shouldn't do it.
like, if a man and a woman are in a conflict, so there's a conflict already on the table, it's not physical yet, the woman has more to fear from the conflict. In a typical, so these are typical concrete ones, not abstract, where the woman could be super like
Yeah, yeah. You
physically
mean that a
dominant.
man
So
could fuck up a woman really badly
if they're
if you
already in a conflict, then both could be anticipating it. So the only reason a woman could likely physically fuck up a man is if she get these specific typical ones is if she gets the element of surprise. If they're in a conflict, that goes away, and then if it were to become physical, the man dominates. And
most
so that
all of the
may,
things being equal. Yeah.
yeah, so that may condition the nature of conflicts in relationships, in typical relationships with a woman who is much physically weaker than the
What's the
man.
question you're trying to ask me? Like, is it ever appropriate for a man to hit a woman? Is that what you're asking me?
No, um, no, if anything, I'd have thought you'd have got the other way round from that.
Was
But
it
I
ever
also don't
appropriate for
think
a
it's,
woman to hit a man?
yeah, I also don't think that. But like, my point is, um, isn't there something there worth talking about the male versus the female experience? Like, if you're in a conflict with your female partner who is physically weaker than you, do you need to do anything to not have it seem like you could turn physical and physically dominate her,
I think if your
sort
woman
of thing?
ever has to think that you could possibly want to physically harm her, you've done something very wrong in the relationship already.
And so going back in time, what sort of things could they have done wrong that aren't physical transgressions for the woman to think that, like punching drywall or
Yes.
something?
Okay. So any woman who's self-aware and embodied in her femininity will tell you that she needs to feel secure with and trust a man more than anything. I think really self-aware women know that they're kind of out of control, or they can be, right? They're prone to that moments of just chaos, right? Uh,
Hashtag yes, all women.
Again, yeah, this is gonna piss off some feminists, me saying this, but and they don't necessarily have to be like wild, violent, chaotic, destructive things. They're just moments of like just temporary insanity, right? And so,
And are you saying yes, all women?
no, I'm saying
Or near
feminine. I'm
enough all
saying
women?
highly femininely aligned women.
Okay.
Um, And so she's really attracted to a man who's the opposite of that, who's very stable, consistent, mature, where she knows exactly what to expect from him, right? And that applies to everything. That's I've even heard people make the connection that that's part of the reason that, besides the obvious, that premature ejaculation is so emasculating to a man and so unattractive to women, besides the fact just that he can't have sex very long, which is a bummer, but it shows that he does not have control over his body, that he can't even handle the slightest amount of sexual stimulation without losing control, right? And I never thought about that before, but actually that makes a lot of sense. If a man shows he's in control of his body and he can take any amount of stimulation uh, and emotional intensity, that's a man you can trust. That's a rock you can build your house on. But a man,
Interesting there that that's positive stimulation that he can't handle rather than
Hmm.
negative, and that's still like not good enough if you're a man who can't handle positive stimulation without
Hmm.
exploding.
Yeah, sure. And whereas the Kyle who punches holes in drywalls is doing that with negative stimulation. I had an annoying day at work today. God damn it, I'm gonna break everything around me, right? Oh, I would never hurt you, baby. Don't worry. You're my angel. You're my darling. I'm just punching the drywall. Well, no, you're
Oh,
signaling that you're not in
so
control of your own body, your own rage.
yeah, so do you have anything about that? Like, so before you get to in a relationship where a woman is fearful of you, how not to get that? So like, don't punch drywall sort of
Well,
thing.
punching drywall
Um,
is a consequence of your inability to handle your own emotions. So,
right, so it goes deeper, and what do you say about that, and do you tie it into the woman being fearful of you and like how to avoid that?
all of this is related, right? It's all connected. It's all one integral association she has with you, how she sees you, which is going to affect how she communicates with you, how she has sex with you, how she does everything with you, right? Everything is just the communication between you two. So if in a heated argument, she has to even think, "Oh, will this turn physical? Is he going to hit me?" It's because you've already spent a very long time building up that association in her mind that you're capable of something like that, with all the other weird little immature signals you've given her. And frankly, such a person probably shouldn't even be in a relationship yet until he works on himself and solves that problem.
Yeah, it might be worth including something about how not to be that person in the first place, sort of thing.
Well, yeah, no, I talk about the
And
importance
like
of
that,
maturing and
how it leads
developing
to
as a
those
man.
consequences,
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
rather than just abstract, like develop as a good man because good, like specifically the consequence of it doesn't work if you aren't because a woman will be fearful of you and your physicality if going back several stages you haven't been a sufficiently
Yeah,
good human being,
yeah.
sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. I'll have to see how I address that. Yeah.
Yeah, I just thought of that one, the violence thing. Like there's got to be something there that ties into your whole thing, the whole dynamic there.
Yeah, yeah, okay. And even how being violent under the right conditions in a controlled, strategic way is also very attractive, very manly.
Such as
Baiting the shit out of a home intruder. Hunting.
that's
I don't
less
know.
controlled though, the situation at least. You're controlled when doing that. But
Yeah.
yeah, um, yeah, so that's kind of the dual side. Like violence for a man is very necessary, but if the woman thinks it could be coming her way, that's very bad.
Right, but she should never have to think that.
Yeah,
She should
exactly.
see that you're in front of her, protecting her, aiming the violence away from her
Yeah,
toward the threat.
that's the image. So the two images, that's the one you want to, as a man, build up. um you want that image to be built up in your relationship and not the image of you being behind the woman with your fists out, in front not behind, ready to
Mhm.
be
Yes.
violent
A
or
man
to
a
take
man
on the
should
world
not
more
be a
generally.
tornado or a hurricane or any image of out of control indiscriminate force. A man is very discriminate force, very unidirectional force. A
Yeah, I was
laser.
just thinking as soon as you started saying tornado, like, oh yeah, that can go all around, whereas
Yeah, exactly.
what you want is it's harnessed
Yes.
against the actual enemy, the dangers that can occur.
And it goes away as soon
You
as it's no longer needed.
Yeah,
A man is a lightsaber, a highly concentrated beam of energy that only extends to a very particular length. It's activated as soon as it's needed and then deactivated when it's not.
that's what she said.
Yeah, like a penis or any other phallic imagery you want to invoke. Do you know that in Star Trek canon, uh, Klingons have two penises?
Oh Jesus. It's gonna make me look at Worf in a whole new light.
Yeah, there's an episode where he gets injured and they talk about how Klingons have extra sets of most organs as like backups and
It's funny when he does his growling thing.
Mhm.
A male Klingon's supposed to embody like a hyper masculinity.
I would see it as very crude masculinity. It's equating masculinity with just like dominance and violence, where that's just
Oh,
one
me,
component of masculinity.
me, damn it. Me want sex. Me kill Grok.
Yeah, exactly. The inability to use grammar correctly.
Oh. So, oh yeah, didn't we go off on a massive, not tangent per se, but you were gonna talk about the structure, and then probably from some part of it, we're not went off into all that structure of the book because I'm sure you didn't
Right,
get
right.
through
Yeah, I'm still
that.
going over the structure. Um, so okay. Hey, men and women are different. What men need women for, which we already talked about.
Just that, right? Just that. That's
Um,
it.
shallow signs of love and affection that people mistake for real romance. Actually, that should probably go earlier when I first talk about what real romance is. Attraction, sexuality, both unhealthy and healthy. Love,
Wait,
romantic
you
love.
start with unhealthy and then go on to healthy.
Yes, you have to state the problem before you state the solution.
Wouldn't it make more sense to state the healthy what it actually is before you state this is how it can be perverted?
No, because
No pun intended.
most people are embodying unhealthy sexual behaviors and perspectives. So I have to state, hey, this is how most people do it. Do this. Here's what's wrong with
No
it.
pun intended.
Now that I've identified what's wrong with the way you probably have sex, and most of the people around you have influenced you to think what sex is supposed to be like, here's what a healthy alternative would look like.
Mm, but if you're dealing on this level of abstractions, can't you only see what's wrong by looking at this is the correct thing and then the normal way differs from it in these ways, and that's why it's wrong, bad.
I think I should
Like the
start with from
normal way fails, like fails means from what's good and right. So if you start with unhealthy, which is
yeah, I understand the reasoning.
what is it failing?
Right. But I think it makes more sense. It's more relatable, more grounded to work from the perspective most people reading the book are likely to have, which is the perspective of the broken, unhealthy world we live in. And
It
then
just
say,
might not work logically unless within that. So maybe if you start with the unhealthy, you might have to continually like prove what the healthy is in order to even say this is what's unhealthy, because healthy is the default regardless of how many
mhm,
are unhealthy. Unhealthy is the deviation from that. So you could do unhealthy first probably, but then within that you'd probably have to like continually refer
I
to
think
the
I do
healthy
that.
sort of thing
I think the way
to
I've
get
written it
the
does that a lot. I'll have to
cool
go
to
over it
get
again,
the
but yeah.
logical like abstractions right, and so it actually makes sense, and so you're not starting off in midair sort of thing.
And then I think I end the book on just kind of general descriptions of what healthy male and female interactions would look like or should look like, right? A world where masculinity and femininity ideally complement each other and everyone lives in harmony. My own personal version of sexual utopia, basically.
And within that, all the masculine has a little bit of femininity, and then with and vice versa, and so on, and it starts all the way down.
Yeah, everything we talked about.
Because if they're like if masculinity is this and femininity is that, then like there's no inherent connection sort of thing. There's got to be the yin and yang thing, like there's got to be some of one within the other. I mean, maybe it just drills down to ultimately both are human and that's the basic fundament. Um like so there can be something shared between them. They're not like just this thing and this other thing that are odds with each other. There has to be an underlying basis from which they can share experience, like for it to be worthwhile for them to uh, integrate into each other's lives, aside from the obvious of, well, there's no other way to continue the human race without it.
Yeah, that by itself is pretty good reasoning. Just the fact that procreation depends on it. But I really coming in it more from the angle of this is what you need to feel fulfilled as a human being to make this work, to build this kind of structure in your life and be happy.